Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Afrikanists Assemble. In this month's episode, we asked our contributors to reimagine some of the institutionalized structures many of them are embedded in. The question we posed to them is, let's pretend that a new university is being founded and you've been asked to design the department that would somehow include the components of African languages and literatures. How would you structure the new department and what would it look like? Here are the answers we received.
Assuming that a new university has been founded and I have been asked to think about an African department that has to do with African languages and literature, I'll begin with a physical structure. The physical structure will be in such a way that once you walk into this department, you will be informed just by looking at it that you're walking into an African milieu, no matter where this particular university is being founded. Secondly, when I go to the staff structure, I will ensure that when we talk about African languages, when we talk especially about the teachers, most of these teachers should be native speakers. Of course, I'm going to appreciate foreigners learning these languages and wanting to teach them, but I will also appreciate when we have more of these teachers who are native speakers of these languages so that we can get first-hand information, very raw experience from those native speakers. And I will want to exploit so many African languages and not be so limited to maybe just Swahili, Hausa, and very few African languages like I have the impression now. I want to go very deep into those very smaller languages that are not even known so that people can research on these languages and these languages might be taught because one doesn't know, students might be interested after all. Also looking at the side of literature and also maybe the department's library. I want to stock the library with so many books and literature from African backgrounds of different countries. This will be an opportunity where even to the least African country with the smallest population and least number of languages is going to be exploited and will be in this library, such that if anyone comes to visit, you can be informed about the whole African continent just by visiting this library actually. So when we look at these different languages, when we go deep into them, when we encourage and have more teachers to teach them, I guess it's going to go a long way to inform people about African languages. Also, I will not want to limit it to just African languages as the mainstream languages. I also want to include youth languages that are somehow being ignored, I could say. So youth languages in its different styles, its different dimensions will be a part and parcel of this new department of African languages. So I guess this is how I want to handle the new department.
If I were hired to design a new department for a university wherever in the world and would have components of African languages and literatures, of course my focus will be first on some of those languages that are spoken on the continent of Africa that are also used for literature. And one of the things I would want is to create a department of ideas from literature so that students will read the literatures and at the same time pull out new ideas, because we'll be talking maybe to the Generation Z, and the Generation Z, they like to be involved, they like to do things, they don't like to be told what to do. So they will be in the driver's seat of making literature come alive, of having literature digitized, of having literature and African languages performed on a regular basis, as opposed to what we have. It is not just going to be a case of learning, it is also going to be a case of performing. So we would have a unit for performance of African languages and literatures in a way that will be very meaningful. And promoting it will be with the use of all platforms, not only digital. It would also be billboards, or digital billboards, and all sorts of things. We would have telephone conversations with friends on the continent, so that if you're learning Yoruba, we would attach you to a radio station in Nigeria that you can contribute to their programs depending on your level. These are the kind of practical things I would ensure that this new university has.
If I'm asked to design a department for a new university that would somehow include the components of African languages and literatures, then it would be nice if the new department is given the nomenclature African Cultural Studies. The courses in this new department, that is African Cultural Studies, will be structured so as to give equal attention to African languages and African literatures as complementary disciplines. While the language-based courses are meant to train students to acquire adequate communicative competence in speech, the literature-based courses will be geared towards promoting reading skills, understanding the principles, theories, and practice of literary artistry through the instrumentality of language. Now, here is my proposed structure for the program. Firstly, alongside the core courses, students should be allowed to pick courses as electives within or outside the department. Secondly, in the first year, the language and literature components shall consist of a total of 6 credit units made up of 2 core courses per semester. The courses in this sense will basically introduce students to African languages in terms of language history, orthography, and sound systems. And in the aspect of African literature, students will be exposed to the oral forms of African poetry, prose, and drama. Thirdly, in the second year, 2 core courses of 6 credit units in the language and literature components will build on the earlier introduction to African languages by looking at aspects such as syntax, morphology, phonetics, phonology, and semantics. While in the aspect of African literature, early literary forms in African languages will be studied. Fourthly, the third year will be devoted to fieldwork, and this is to enable students to have first-hand information on African languages and their literary forms by going to selected indigenous communities to collect data, analyze, and even document same for assessment. Lastly, the fourth year should be based on comparative studies that will enable students account for the similarities and dissimilarities of African languages and their literary works. Now, with this 4 years structure, it is believed that the selection of their formation courses and their academic exercises will establish a healthy balance between language and literature in African studies.
For this new department in African languages and literatures, I would make sure to appoint a musicologist. The study of music combines analyzing musical structure with sung content in performance and in society, and that is how African languages and literatures should be studied, giving a prominent place to the societal aspect and not only to the representation in the brain or in thought. And then the courses in this department integrate students and speakers around the globe, making use of the possibilities of global connectivity in cyberspace.
Ọ bụrụ na asị m hazie ngalaba asụsụ na agụmagụ Afrịka, aga m enwe ngalaba asụsụ na agụmagụ Afrịka nke m ga-ekewapụta unit 2, unit ndị nkụzi na unit ndị na-anaghị akụzi nkụzi. Unit ndị nkụzi ga-abụrịrị ọkammụta ga-abụ onye isi ha. a ga-enwe nkebi anọ ga-anọ n'okpuru unit ndị nkụzi ha bụ asụsụ na linguistics. N'ebe a ka a ga-enwe ma kụzie kọọsụ niile nọ n'asụsụ na linguistics. Agụmagụ Afrịka, anyị ga-ekebi agụmagụ Afrịka ụzọ abụọ, agụmagụ ọdịnala na nke ederede. Anyị ga-akụzi ma mee ezi nchọcha na agụmagụ ọdịnala na nke ederede, ntụgharị na ịgụ maọbụ inye ihe aha. Nke a bụ otu n'ime ụzọ anyị ga-esi chekwaa ma wulite asụsụ Afrịka site n'ịtụgharị ihe ndị edere n'asụsụ ndị ọzọ gaa n'asụsụ anyị nakwa site na nke anyị gaa n'asụsụ ndị ọzọ. Ịgụ ihe aha, ọkachasị ihe ndị bụ mbịarambịara tinyere sayensị na nka na ụzụ na-enye aka n'iwulite asụsụ ala anyị yana imepụta ọka asụsụ. Nchọcha na ndekọta nchọcha, a ga-enwe ọfịs tara ọchịchị ga na-ahụ maka nchọcha na ndekọta nchọcha ndị e mere gbasara asụsụ na agụmagụ ala anyị. Ọ bụ n'ime nchọcha na ndekọta nchọcha ka ọmụmụ asụsụ na agụmagụ Afrịka na-agba nnukwu ọnụ paa. Unit ndị na-anaghị akụzi nkụzi, abịa na unit ndị na-anaghị akụzi nkụzi nke ndị ọrụ odeakwụkwọ, ya bụ ndị ọrụ rejistra gbagotere n'ọkwa ga-ahụ maka ha. Anyị ga-enwe odeakwụkwọ, ndị na-ahụ maka nhazisi faịlụ, ndị na-akụpụta nakwa ebipụta ihe na kọmputa yana ndị oje ozi. Ka anyị were eserese a gosipụta yiri ezigbo usoro ọrụ. Ngalaba asụsụ na agụmagụ Afrịka, anyị ga-enwe unit abụọ n'okpuru nke a, unit ndị na-anaghị akụzi nkụzi na unit ndị na-akụzi nkụzi. Na unit ndị na-anaghị akụzi nkụzi, anyị ga-enwe odeakwụkwọ, ndị na-ahụ maka nhazisi faịlụ, ndị na-akụpụta nakwa ebipụta ihe na kọmputa yana ndị oje ozi. Na unit ndị na-akụzi nkụzi, anyị ga-enwe nkebi anọ, asụsụ na linguistics, ebe anyị ga-akụzi ihe niile gbasara asụsụ na linguistics. Agụmagụ Afrịka, anyị ga-eke agụmagụ Afrịka abụọ, agụmagụ ọdịnala na agụmagụ ederede. Nke atọ, anyị ga-enwe ntụgharị na ịgụ maọbụ inye aha, ebe a ka anyị ga-atụgharị ihe niile edere n'asụsụ ndị ọzọ gaa n'asụsụ anyị maọbụ site n'asụsụ anyị gaa n'asụsụ ndị ọzọ. Na nkebi nke anọ, anyị ga-enwe nchọcha na ndekọta. N'ebe a, anyị ga-enwe nchọcha na ndekọta tara ọchịchị iji wulite asụsụ na agụmagụ Africa. Ndewonu.
If I were asked to design a department for a new university, it would be the Department of African Languages and Literature. The department shall provide holistic approaches to the understanding of African languages and worldview through literary and linguistic engagement of the written text in both African languages and those translated from other languages such as the English, French, German, or Chinese languages. Specifically, courses from the Department of African Languages and Literature shall explore the mechanism of African languages in relation to African literature. The department shall engage the immediate and host communities through programs and scholarships that would facilitate the smooth relationship between the town and gown. Therefore, programs in the department shall deeply accommodate the translation of African literature and cultures from the classical times to the present. In this sense, translation studies shall be another key component of the department. All in all, the various courses shall be focusing on the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial experiences of the African reality.
But having witnessed the establishment of a few universities in Kenya, I've come to appreciate that such an endeavor is complex. It has its own challenges, but I would still say yes. I would try to come up with a model that is novel yet practical, and despite the complexity surrounding establishment of such curriculum, I would endeavor to put in place structures that would be centered around teaching and research in African languages and literatures. The department or the curriculum would be modeled in a manner that integrates linguistics in its broad sense, and the structure of the studies would be at both undergraduate and graduate levels. These particularly would enhance research into these African languages. Within the department, the study of language would be modeled around research, gaining information, and documenting such useful information on African languages, especially those that have not been documented or even standardized in the past. These would not preclude research in other languages, be they African or world languages, especially for comparative purposes. A similar approach would be employed while studying literature, but oral literature would be at the center, given its centrality in African creative space. I would, however, insist on giving prominence to efforts that tend to teach oral literature in a live manner, and these would be captured through emphasis of aspects of fieldwork within the curriculum.
Designing a department that incorporates African languages and literatures require careful consideration of certain vital factors. The name of this new department, I suggest, would be Department of African Literatures and Languages. This new department, the language of instruction would be African languages. African languages would be used to interpret and appreciate African texts. Also, this department would recruit highly qualified faculty with expertise in African languages and literatures. These are people who have very strong background in both African literary and Western literary traditions, and are able to engage in critical analysis of text from a more robust and a variety of perspectives. The curriculum would be designed to offer a comprehensive understanding of African languages and literatures. Certain overlooked aspects of African literatures would be brought to bear and considered. Take, for instance, what is called superstition would be considered in a more holistic way in order to determine how this phenomenon really affects African people. This department would engage in researches on African languages and literatures, especially any research that is able to bridge the gap between African and Western literary traditions. The department would encourage her students to engage in workshops and community outreaches to provide opportunities for students to participate in internships and field trips. This department would be designed in such a way that it promotes a deeper understanding of African cultures, tradition, and encourage critical analysis of text.
If I were to establish a Department of African Studies focusing on African languages and literature in a new university, my first task would be to design a curriculum that possesses a research-driven focus on indigenous and endangered languages, especially the languages spoken by minorities, which is currently not the case in many existing departments. I'll commence by defining the kind of staff I want, which must be established scholars of major African languages and literature. Experts in major languages, when recruited, will be made to direct their orientation and resources acquired in the study of other well-known major robust languages to specified indigenous languages. I will also outline my mission, which is to revive the dying languages of minority tribes in Africa. I will cite a personal example. I recently got certified by my nation's universities commission to review curricula of my discipline across the country. In developing new curricula, crafted in line with the missions and visions of our respective universities, I discovered that a lot needed to be done in African languages and literature. So much. The courses I developed had a third of the contact hours devoted to fieldwork, which would expose the students to real-life issues in the course they were to master. A quarter also was devoted to practical work on campus. This way, the students are acquainted with the principles of the course and are sent to the field to make discoveries that would assist them in reviving dying African languages and literatures. So back to what I was saying. After recruitment, I will also ensure that the research of the faculties who have been recruited would also be guided to reviving dying languages with grants from endowments, university, and the country's education grant awarding institutions or parastatals. All these, I believe, would drive the momentum of reviving dying African languages. So African languages and literature would get better, and many dying African languages would be revived this way, so that nothing is lost, but everything is gained.
If asked to design a department that would somehow include components of African languages and literatures, I would first of all request for physical facilities that would include language and literature libraries, specifically for African languages. I would also request for an African languages laboratory fully equipped with state-of-the-art world-class language equipment. The African Language Laboratory will double as a research center for African languages. In addition, I would initiate a unit for the study of oral literatures in African languages from primordial times to the present generation. Another separate unit would be the translation unit that would see to the literary and cultural exchanges through translation. Most importantly, my focus will be on reviving or revitalizing languages of the immediate community, minority languages, and endangered languages. For example, in Plateau State, where I am from, there are over 52 ethnic groups, and if I were to design a department that would incorporate African languages, I would prioritize at least 10 of the languages in Plateau State, Nigeria, along with other developed native languages across Africa.
If I am to do the component of the department of a new African language and literature, in consideration of the structure, I shall have 2 units within the component. These units are African language and literature. The African language unit shall include in its curriculum all major and minor African languages, particularly those that are going extinct and are being corrupted out of originality. The curriculum will not only feature them for learning, but to study and sustain originality of the language. The various strands of the languages within the curriculum are also expected to be included in the study. The textual, symbolic, or oral literature of the minor or major languages shall constitute the second unit of the department. This is important so as to enable the existing literature of the major or minor languages to complement the study of the languages. Furthermore, the structure of the departmental learning activities shall also be in 2 parts, formal and informal, while the curriculum shall provide for normal academic procedures of learning or Western departmental learning system. The former shall be communal learning system. The departmental learning system shall constitute the design courses, units, research, and teaching. The communal learning system shall take the form of language tourism, that is, traveling to spend a specified time in the African community that is being studied. This is important because learning the language is as important as living the language. This will enable the learner to understand the gestural,
paralanguage and environmental influence and inference of the language being studied. Thank you.
These were all the responses by our contributors to this month's question. What do you think about the departmental structures and programs for research and teaching they come up with? How would you design such a new department around African languages and literatures? Leave us your ideas in the comments below. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Afrikanists Assemble. As we are releasing a new episode each month, make sure to subscribe to not miss any upcoming episodes and the questions we post.